What was the last country to occupy Iran? In 1942, the Soviet Union, in a joint invasion with Britain, sent its army into Iran and took control of the northern areas, including the Iranian capital, Tehran. So who was leading the country during this occupation? This man, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, known today as the Shah. Pahlavi had to deal with something embarrassing for the country. Iran was split between north and south under Russian and British control, and the Shah simply didn't have enough power to change anything. In 1943, for example, the leaders of the US, Britain, and the Soviet Union met in Iran to decide what they would do after World War II ended. The Shah hosted them and cooperated with them against Germany. The three powers agreed that they all shared a common desire to maintain the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Iran. But as often happens, reality was quite different. After the war ended, the British and Soviets were supposed to withdraw from Iran. The British did, but the Soviets had another plan. The Soviet Union refused to withdraw from Iran, and this was a huge problem for the Shah. The Soviet presence was not only a direct occupation of the country, it could also encourage the spread of communist groups in the region, and with that, change Iran's political trajectory. But luckily for the Shah, this time he wasn't alone in his fear of the Russians. The spread of communism in the Middle East in general, and Iran in particular, was a major concern for American leadership. If Russia gained control over Iran, its path to the Gulf with all its energy resources and to the Indian Ocean would be wide open. So the Americans backed the Shah, and with international pressure, got the Soviets to withdraw, and that's how a friendly relationship began between the leaders in Tehran and Washington, especially since the Soviet withdrawal gave the Shah the political room to exercise power inside and outside the country. The Shah's main threat lay on his northern border with the Soviet Union, and his main goal was to prevent the growth of Soviet and communist influence, mirroring America's own policy of containment against communist activities. With their aligned interests, the United States began selling arms to Iran, strategic weapons for a country who at this point was quite weak compared to the massive Soviet military. From the Shah's perspective, the Soviet threat wasn't just from the north, but from the west as well. In 1955, Egypt under President Gamal Abdel Nasser bought arms from the Soviets and deepened its ties with the Kremlin. Nasser was also critical of America, its European allies, and of monarchism in general. On top of that, he had excellent relations with the Soviets. This in and of itself wasn't a problem. The problem was that his ties to the Soviet Union and his popularity could have increased the Soviet presence in the Middle East and encouraged other countries to cooperate with Soviet policies. Syria, for example, had friendly ties with Russia, and its unification with Egypt in 1958 further proved its cooperation with Nasser. So the Shah needed to respond and adapt to this new geopolitical reality, especially with the Soviets right on Iran's border. The Iranian king pursued this strategy. The top priority was maintaining relations with the United States and its allies, who also saw Nasser's ideology and his cooperation with the Soviet Union as a threat. And in any case, it was better for Iran to be militarily strong in order to carry out its foreign policy, with a stronger military purchased from the USA. The second priority was building relations with regional partners under the umbrella of US support. For example, Iran joined the Baghdad Pact, a Middle Eastern alliance including Turkey, Iraq, Pakistan, the UK, and Iran. The pact was similar to NATO in Europe, and was designed to contain communism and the Soviet Union. Like the Shah, member states feared Nasser's ideology, which was aligned with the Soviets. And also like the Shah, they had strategic relations with the Americans, whether it was Turkey through NATO or Pakistan's cooperation with the United States. But the Baghdad Pact collapsed, especially after the 1958 July Revolution in Iraq, which overthrew the monarchy and pushed the country towards Nasser. Alongside the Baghdad Pact, the Shah also built strategic ties with the Israelis. Like Iran, the Israelis were against Nasser's ideology, but unlike Iran, the State of Israel was directly on Egypt's border and capable of going to war. Before the 1967 war, Iran was the State of Israel's main oil supplier, and in the end, the 1967 defeat was what weakened Nasser's popularity and made regaining lost territories Egypt's main focus, thereby weakening Nasser's influence throughout the region. In 1971, a significant development occurred in the region. Britain withdrew from its presence in the Persian Gulf, and then US President Richard Nixon needed a new guardian for the region. Here, the Shah saw an opportunity. The opportunity stemmed from the Nixon Doctrine, the principle that America would continue to support its allies, but that its allies must assume responsibility for their own security. For the Shah, Iran was in a very good position to play the role of guardian and take responsibility for security of the region. Its military at this point had become much stronger, and unlike Arab armies, was not involved in any war. So the Shah took advantage of this and launched both military and diplomatic interventions. For example, when a communist insurgency erupted in Oman, Iran sent its army to crush it. At the same time, Iran fought border skirmishes with Iraq in the early 1970s, which eventually ended with the 1975 Algiers Agreement. In addition to this, the Shah was more than ready to build ties with Egypt's new president, Anwar Sadat, after the October 1973 war. Sadat was open to cooperation with the United States and to peace initiatives. But what mattered most for the Shah was that under Sadat, Egypt distanced itself from the Soviet Union. This was a chance to prevent the renewal of Soviet-Egyptian cooperation, and thus block Soviet influence from such a strategic position on the map. So by the late 1970s, the Shah had helped build a strong Iran, with a large army and extensive diplomatic influence. He also managed to resist Soviet influence in the north, and with the help of America and its regional allies, reduce Soviet influence in the rest of the Middle East. But the Shah himself wouldn't last long. Although Iran was strong externally, the Shah's rule wasn't entirely popular domestically. The revolution against him completely changed Iran's geopolitical position, and the country became significantly weaker due to internal instability. But that's a story for another time. Thank you for watching.